Let's cut to the chase, have an honest conversation, and develop real answers. As a matter of fact, with Andrew Cuomo. Welcome back to As a Matter of Fact, and I'm Andrew Cuomo. Today it's a pleasure to be joined with Mark Penn. We've spoken with Mark Penn before. Let me make sure you know the context and the history between myself and Mr. Penn. Mark Penn and I started a long time ago in politics. 1977, there was a mayoral election in New York City. Candidates, Ed Koch, Mario Cuomo. I was with Mario Cuomo because my mother said I had to be, and because I wanted to be. And there was this young, brilliant mathematician, statistician, who did something with polling, which in 1977 was sort of a new science done on these computer cards and what would be considered archaic now, who was working with a person named David Garth, God rest his soul. David Garth was a pioneer in many ways. He was the first modern media man, if you will. And he did it as a science. He looked at polls, and he had Mark Penn, the brilliant mathematician, pollster, predicting where people were going to go and where they were. And then he would test television ads. And he was a character, David Garth. He was only about 5'0", but he was a tough, feisty, gravelly New Yorker, and a great strategist, campaign spokesperson, and he was sort of the Uber campaign manager who did everything. He just total control of the campaign, irascible guy. They actually did a movie that he said was premised on him with Richard Gere. I don't know if you remember that, with Richard Gere as a political consultant. But anyway, 1977, Mark Penn really revolutionizes in a lot of ways the way polls are used in campaigns. Ed Koch beats Mario Cuomo, probably in the long run for the good for Mario Cuomo, because I don't know that he really wanted to be mayor anyway. And then 1982, rematch, Koch-Cuomo for governor of New York. Mario Cuomo wins. But that's when we first started. Mark then went on to run campaigns and elections all around the world. We caught up during the Clinton administration, where we worked together for the entirety of the Clinton administration. Mark then did Hillary Clinton and more campaigns around the world, and then went to the corporate world with Microsoft, where he was the chief strategist, and now he's running a large firm, advertising, media, polling, research, Stagwell, and he's doing phenomenally well. But I will say this, I believe in this business, in this regard, Mark Penn is truly brilliant. I don't know how he is at playing poker or golf or anything else, but he is brilliant when it comes to this. So it's a pleasure to be with him. Mark, we want to talk about the presidential election. And, you talk to people and some people say, presidential, that's 2 years still. The primaries aren't for a year. But I don't see it that way. This is bizarre in a lot of ways because we really know right now, or with some degree of certainty, who the opponents are, who the candidates are, what the field looks like, and what the American people think about the field. And we still have a couple of years before the actual election. Two polls that I'd like to talk to you about. One, 60% of the American people say they don't want Trump. 70% of the American people say they don't want Biden. That was a poll about 10 days ago. And then you had a recent ABC poll just the other day. 44% for Trump, 38% for Biden. Mark, what is going on here?
Well, first, thank you Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Let me go back to 1977 for just a second before I answer your question. We did the first poll in 1977, and who are the leaders? Bella Abzug and Abe Beame. People probably don't even remember. Abe Beame was the mayor temporarily from being controller, and Bella Abzug was a radical, well-known feminist leader. Mario Cuomo had 2%, and Ed Koch had 2%. And the runoff wound up Ed Koch versus Mario Cuomo. And so what does that tell you? It tells you that front runners early on in these primaries aren't necessarily the winners, because front runners usually start out with every vote they're going to ever have. And the candidates of potential then through this race, they say, oh yeah, that's the kind of people we really want to be mayor. We don't want kind of what we didn't want, right? And so what you turn out here in this presidential election, to me, is very similar. Does everyone really want Donald Trump as the Republican nominee? He's got about 50% of the Republicans, 46, 52, very close. That means there's another half, even of the Republicans, who aren't sure they want him to be the nominee. And then he's got a bunch of opponents, right? DeSantis having kind of emerged from the pack, but faltering. But I wouldn't call that race over, because even though Trump has a lot of strength in the Republican Party, there are a lot of people who are saying, well, you know, he was our nominee twice. Do we really want to do it a third time? And also, I think people misjudge the history of Republican primary voters. They voted for John McCain, right, and Mitt Romney. So there must be a group. And when Trump ran, he didn't run as Ted Cruz. He ran as the outsider independent,
yeah.
Right? And so I think it's a little different than it looks, maybe. And then on the Democratic side, boy, the president is polling less than 40% when I do a who do you want in the Democratic primary. And his numbers shockingly went down after he announced for presidency. The whole idea was to freeze the field and kind of have him go up. And the opposite happened. People said, you know, I didn't really think he would run for a second term. And so, you know, we might wind up with Trump versus Biden. It's probably the highest probability, but I don't think that probability is more than a third. And I think that on the other hand, if there are some smart challengers here, they have openings, because, as you just pointed out, Governor, this is not really what the voters want. Even the voters in the parties don't really want this outcome.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it one at a time. On the Republican side, when we had this conversation a few weeks ago, well, DeSantis was going to beat Trump. DeSantis was going to get in. A lot of people unhappy with Trump, and then DeSantis was the skyrocket, and he was the next best thing since whole bread. What happened with DeSantis, and is there an opening for someone else, and do you see anybody else on the Republican horizon?
Well, I think, and I did a Wall Street Journal article, and I said, look, I don't normally give advice to Republicans, but if you don't want Trump to be the nominee, because if he's the nominee, he could probably win, then let's look at DeSantis. And DeSantis really went for the conservative voter, right? He took his Disney fight to the next level. He signed a 6-week abortion bill, which I think was a big mistake on his part. He should have differentiated himself and stuck with 15 or 16 weeks. And moderates began to question whether or not, you know, he is somebody they were comfortable voting for. And his Republican support was the more moderate Republican support. And so he should have really run on what I say was his competence, character, and common sense. He should have said, look, Trump doesn't have the character, Biden doesn't have the competence, and I have the common sense, like a balanced budget, like putting criminals in jail, right? And he should have gotten out of ideology right? And just been kind of the vibrant challenger who could win. And so I think his campaign's seriously off track. He's not getting any of the ultra MAGA support from Trump. He misplayed the hand. Now, most even winning presidential campaigns have near-death moments. That's part of the game. So I don't think he's out, but I don't know if he's re-strategized. So I think we're going to watch that. And if it's not him, Tim Scott could be really quite credible, and I think could come on strong, provide an interesting alternative. There's a little murmurings of Glenn Youngkin, getting in, but I don't think that Trump's going to go unchallenged here, and I don't think he's going to walk back into the nomination.
Isn't it kind of fascinating, even with everything we've seen, and we've seen a lot, and I love that expression, the near-death moments in the president. It's so true, right? How many times you live and die during a campaign, right? Somebody walks in, a reporter just called, and there's a new poll, and for sure we're dead, and so it takes years off your life, but such a joy. What else? You have Donald Trump investigated, indicted, harassed, harangued, Manhattan District Attorney, Attorneys General, Georgia. How does none of this stuff stick to him?
Oh, I think it's boomeranging. I think that the more they prosecute him, the stronger he is, because the more it tells Republican voters, this democratic system is corrupt. And so it takes somebody with the strength of Donald Trump to overturn it. And that's why every time they attack him with all this, he didn't even bother to show up at the rape trial. It's like, because he knows that, well, it's in a democratic city with a special bill with no evidence. And so he can just say, well, look, this is just the way Democrats operate, and it strengthens him. And it repeatedly has done that. His campaign, when he announced, was completely lackluster, going nowhere. And the more they attack him, the bigger they're making him. And I don't know, I can't tell whether they're doing it because they want him to be the nominee or they're doing it because they want to stop him. I'm a little confused about that.
I think they're doing it for their individual politics, by the way. If we were having this conversation in front of a political science class, what I would ask you, and what I do find very troubling, just from a good government point of view, Alvin Bragg, Democratic Manhattan District Attorney, indicts Donald Trump. The majority of the Democrats say they believe the indictment was politically influenced. A majority of the Democrats say a Manhattan Democratic District Attorney indicted Trump, tried to put somebody in jail, and was politically influenced, were the words. And a majority of the Republicans believe it was politically influenced. Less surprising than the Democrats. But that means a majority of the country, Mark, believe we use the justice system to play politics. Now, the cynic in me can say, you just figured that out? But that is sort of a shocking acknowledgement by the people of the country that we are playing politics with the justice system, Lady Justice, blind, balanced scales, baloney. We're playing politics with the justice system. A majority of the nation believes it. Isn't that probably the most damning piece of evidence that we've seen that says people have really lost faith in this government on a very fundamental level, just the basic institution of it? Because if there was anything that was supposed to be sacrosanct, it was that. You don't put people in jail because they're a political opponent, right? That's Putin does that, right? Isn't that shocking?
Well, look, there's no question that freedom of speech and equal justice under the law are maybe the two most important values in which to have a democracy. Now, the surprising thing about the polling on this is that I asked that question in our Harris poll, okay, do you think Trump should be indicted? Most Democrats say yes. Then I asked them, well, do you think he's going to be convicted? They say no. Then I said, well, do you think these payments are a political contribution? They say no. So what's even more troubling is that people today are willing to put partisanship over principle. They're willing to say, well, it's okay to indict him even though I know it's fake as long as it advances, stops him, right? And so too many people, not everybody, but too many people are accepting that these fundamental principles and values can be put out the window in order to get to a political objective. And that's why people like Alan Bragg are doing what they're doing, because they're seeing they're getting accepted. They're not paying a price for a political prosecution. They get on TV, they become known nationally, they get, they're rallied to by certain groups, they pick up funding, and they don't say, you know what, Alan, you're hurting the system. If the voters don't want Trump, they're not going to vote for him. This case is really gonna come back because when you use the system, some attorney in Tennessee is going to use it the opposite way, and the whole system. So I'm a little pessimistic about this. I don't know how we get out of it. It's we've gone. You have to get almost to a McCarthy moment where somebody says, have you no decency? Somebody at some point has to turn around and say that we can't have our justice system operate for political ends. And someone has to come in and reestablish those as core values again, because they are deteriorating.
Mark, look, I am no Pollyanna when it comes to this, right? I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly in politics, as have you. And I have very little trust for the system writ large, as sad as that comment is. But this still surprised me, and I don't want to harp on it, but you have Alvin Bragg in Manhattan. He's worried about re-election. There's a backdrop story that we don't really need to get into, but that he had an assistant in his office who wanted to indict Trump. He decided not to indict Trump. The assistant leaves, writes a book that Bragg should have indicted Trump. And the backdrop, as you say, is you're in Manhattan, so there's only two people who are going to vote for Trump, and those two people are going to vote for Trump by mistake. So this is sort of all upside for Alvin Bragg. But you have the Manhattan is also home of the new woke Democrats, right? The idealistic Democrats. The Manhattan liberals, those were the intellectuals. Those were the white wine liberals, we used to call them 100 years ago, when nobody walked into a bar and ordered white wine. But they were the Manhattan intellectual liberals. But even they are okay with this. Nobody has said, by the way, nobody has said, Alvin Bragg, you're playing politics, and you don't play politics with the justice system. Even though everyone says, as you just said, they believe it's politically influenced, they believe the charges are bogus, they believe he's going to beat them, but because they dislike him so much, indict him. Indict him because I don't like him. That's what we're doing. Indict him because I don't like him and we don't want him to win. So indict him as a form of harassment and political penalty. But where are the great liberals, the great progressives, saying this is wrong, it's an abuse of the system, your point, if Democrats do it, Republicans will do it, it's not what our forefathers wanted, it's not what the Constitution provides, due process. What happened? Where are they?
They're not coming. No, look. When there was the whole Trump-Russia thing, I went through the Steele dossier and I read this and I said, this is a joke. Anybody could tell that this is a joke. A kindergartner could tell that this is made up and fabricated. It's completely fantasy. So I went out and said, because I had been with President Clinton during his impeachment, and I saw how these investigations, warp the presidency, make it very difficult to govern, and you do want your president governing and not spending all this time kind of worrying about investigations unless they're justified. And so I found in that people thought that was unusual, right? That I was not a Trump supporter. I was a supporter of proper investigations, not something that was fabricated. And it turned out that it was all a fake dossier, which, by the way, as I urged people, I said, read it. You can tell it's fake. And it was. And here you have kind of a repeat of this. The difference being, I think now Alan Bragg is making Donald Trump stronger because everybody sees what this is. It's not, I think in Trump-Russia, genuinely, people were so convinced by this that half the country thought it was true.
Yeah.
In this case, people don't even think it's true. And Hillary Clinton paid for the Steele dossier, violating a campaign law that you have to put the purpose and the ultimate beneficiary of where you're spending money. And she was fined $100,000 for that. She wasn't criminally locked up. She wasn't indicted. The idea this would be a campaign contribution is ludicrous because then people would be putting all sorts of personal stuff on there. So everybody knows this, but you're right. It's a degradation of our system. We're seeing it everywhere. And that's why I think there's an opening for a candidate that is going to come back very strongly and say, hey, let's talk about the issues, inflation, crime, immigration, okay, racial justice, climate change, equality for women. Let's talk about the issues instead of trying to tear everybody down. Look, as you point out, I was a political consultant for many years. I barely recognize the profession now. Yeah. We used to start with ideas. Here they start with, well, let's see, did Andrew get a parking ticket in 1980? Right? Maybe we could blow that up. It wasn't just a parking ticket. It was a massive fine for illegal activity.
Yeah.
Right? And like I barely recognize what this has become.
Let's go to the Biden side, Democratic side. Why is he doing so poorly? Look, I don't think he has had an outstanding administration, but he's performed, I think, better than the polls would suggest. Why so negative? Is it him, the Times? What is it?
Well, I think, number one, people don't think he's up for the job. Most people think he's too old. They question his basic competence. His administration fell apart with the Afghanistan action. If you go back in the history, the idea was he was going to be a likable, more centrist candidate, would in fact be the anti-Trump in a way that would bring the country together. Well, he certainly didn't bring the country together. He ran an administration essentially for Democrats. He's seen by everybody as governing more to the left than they expected. I think the whole country would have tolerated that. What they didn't tolerate was what they saw as incompetence in Afghanistan. Then they see it in the border. Then they see it in crime. And then they see it in the inflation problem and the spending. Right, 81% now want a balanced budget. So when you add all this up, his job ratings on everything are about 40% or lower. And so, it's kind of simple. They just don't think he's doing a good job.
Yeah. Right?
He didn't deliver on the one thing they really elected him for, uniting the country. And then he didn't deliver on the issues. And he's not really communicating to them in any real way. He put out an announcement in which the major issue was democracy. Yeah. Wasn't inflation. Wasn't how we're going to tackle the big problems that voters are feeling in their everyday lives. And so there are a lot of reasons why he's weak. In fact, I'd be shocked if he was seen as strong.
Why, Mark, do the Democrats, almost nationwide, why have the Democrats, why do they now have such a problem addressing day-to-day, what do we used to say, bread and butter issues? They
Kitchen
won't
table.
say the word crime. Cities are overrun with mentally ill homeless people. They're afraid to go near that. We had an election here in New York where the Democrats almost lost because they were afraid to say the C word. The C word is now crime. Literally, they were running around saying, crime is not a problem. It's Republican propaganda. Meanwhile, New Yorkers were like, hello, what planet are you from? What is that in the Democratic Party?
Well, it's been puzzling. It really has been puzzling because we always thought this was a mix of moving forward with progressive ideas, but always dealing with the problems of the country. And when I worked with President Clinton, the first thing we did was get the police on our side, kind of work to, find ways to reduce crime, which was out of control, in the 90s. And that was consistent, not in opposition to a progressive philosophy. And what's happened here in terms of divorcing attacking issues like crime with progressivism has left a lot of voters scratching their head, a lot of opening. You saw Zeldin almost won in New York against Kathy Hochul, and he really only had one issue, crime. So I see it coming up. Immigration is not to be ignored. Inflation is not to be ignored. And people expect programs in these issues. And look, I think the Democrats saw that they were able to get through the midterms better than they expected by essentially running against Trump, running on anti-MAGA Republicans. And after all, they're losing on the prime issues of the country, so they didn't want to talk about them. I think that can happen in a presidential campaign? No, I don't. I think the problems are too big, the voters are too smart.
Why, Mark, is Kamala Harris so negatively perceived?
Well, I think, it is puzzling because she was given some pretty, let's call them meaty assignments. Difficult, but certainly assignments like immigration, where she could have gone right down the border. She could have shown herself working together with all sorts of, with all sorts of forces. And instead, she felt, I guess, that, wow, the left would attack her if she even got near the actual issue. And so I think they saw her really duck issue after issue, right? And by ducking those issues, I think then they see kind of her non-answers to questions. They've got a deep impression of her that she's not really qualified. And this was known very early on. And she's really done very little to improve that. She hasn't taken a meaty issue, the way Gore might say took something like, terrorism and climate change, and really driven it successfully. So her ratings are even lower than Biden's. And of course, the Republican strategy will be to run against her instead of Biden.
Yeah. If it plays out the way it now looks, let's say it's Trump, let's say it's Biden, polls say Trump wins. Would your crystal ball say that?
Again, I always think being president's a low probability profession. That if Trump has a 60% chance of getting the Republican nomination and Biden has a 60% chance, then there's a 36% chance we will see that matchup, right? There's still a 64% chance in with those numbers that you'll see something else. If it is that, you can see that Trump is learning to be calmer, more issue-oriented, more boring even, right? And I think he is, I thought that his first campaign was brilliant. I thought his second campaign was a disaster. He lost because he lost the campaign and the issues, and he didn't have anything. But the first campaign, he really drove a whole set of issues, and he was elected on those issues, whether it was immigration, trade, economy, law and order. I don't know what his third campaign is really looking like yet, except that I notice that he comes off a lot calmer, tries to give an air of confidence. And I was surprised in that Washington Post poll. Nobody thought he was not competent to be president.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They all thought that Biden was not competent to be president. They may not like Trump, but he gets over the competence bar, and that is pretty surprising to me.
Yeah. Let's take Trump and Biden out of it for a second, if you can. Next election, just the mood of the country, House and Senate. And again, these are all unfair questions. But since I know you for 50 years, I don't have a problem doing that. Take Trump, Biden out of it, and obviously they're the main influence. What's your guess, House and Senate, Democrat, Republican?
I just think actually it's a little early to tell that this is really, that in a presidential year, this is going to go the way the presidency and the presidential votes go. People split their ticket in the midterm elections, right? They don't split their ticket in the presidential election as much. The Republicans clearly have an edge in a lot of the Senate races, and so they're kind of licking their chops. Look, a Biden-Trump race can't produce a landslide either way. It's going to be 2 points, one way or the other, right? Popular vote, maybe for Biden, maybe not. Electoral college edge. It's going to be a repeat of exactly what we saw before, with the same people going to the polls and with it coming down to 50,000 votes. So in that case, most likely you'll have close to a stalemate in Congress as well. It will take another candidate to break the logjam in America here who really can get crossover votes.
Yeah.
And if that candidate is someone on the Democratic side who really comes on strong, then I believe they'll have a Democratic sweep. And I think it's the opposite on the Republican side. But if it's Trump against Biden, we are in a dead heat and a toss-up who wins.
Yeah. What I'm worried about, Mark, going back again to the political science class and good government, let's say this is what happens. It's Trump and it's Biden. 2 years to get to the election, and then 4 years for the results of that election. That's a long period of time for this country to suffer through this period where they're not really enamored with the president. There is no new president, which then gives a spirit of hope and optimism, and it's a new day. Then probably we don't have a clear majority in the House or the Senate, which means we still can't get things done. The economy is a problem. That's a long period of time to have this hyper-political, hyper-partisan, pessimistic mood, no?
It is. I always say that we're in a Nixon, Carter, Reagan cycle, right? Trump was Nixon. He was unacceptable to the elites. He had to go. Carter got elected in reaction, wouldn't have gotten elected to Nixon, otherwise wouldn't have gotten elected. Served one term, and then the country had a direction with Reagan. Like it or not, it had a direction. And this election, to me, is important to have someone fresh who can set a direction for 8 years and can overcome the 50-50 country we have that's stuck in gridlock. And you're exactly right. If we just get a repeat, we can't have that election. We'll have to wait another 4 years. And, you know, most voters, 60%, if it's Trump against Biden, are interested in an independent centrist candidate. It's the highest number I've ever seen because when I used to work in Britain, we used to call this the clothespin voter. You'd hold your nose, meaning you didn't like either one, but you had to pick one. And as you point out, that's just no place to stick the country for another 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. On that happy note, the Koch-Cuomo race was more fun in '77, that's for sure.
Yes, this is like having Abzug against Beam over and over again, rather than getting Koch versus Cuomo.
Phoebe, you couldn't make up Abzug versus Beam. Beam was, what was he, 4'2", tiny. gray-haired, sort of right out of Central Casting. Bella Abzug was larger-than-life congresswoman, big hat, west side of Manhattan, loud, scrappy. Those were the good old days, Mark. Thank you for taking time. Thank you.